All right, welcome everyone. Today we're going to be doing our quick OOP review, and we're going to do this with a different point of view, right? We want to make sure that we get different points of view as to how we should do OOP. So here we have the school interface exercise. It's broken up into 3 parts. I will lead us through part 1. During part 2, we'll do more of a, hey, what do you guys think I should do? And I'll have you guys navigate while I go ahead and drive and turn your ideas and thoughts into actual code. And then in part 3, I'll pick the stick up again and finish off the coding assignment. The end state here is that we'll be building a portal for a student registry, it seems, where we'll be able to list all the current students inside of this administrative system or this makeshift database that we're going to be creating within Python. We'll be able to view individual students, which I'm assuming will have more details about the student. We'll be able to create students and remove a student, which both of those already sound like will require a couple of getters and setters as well. All right, and then finally, people will be able to stop the program. Let's see, so for this challenge, okay, it doesn't seem like we have a test for this specific problem. We do have a school, and we have a runner, which imports from the class of school. So it doesn't seem like we have a school class. We do have a school class, but it doesn't have an initializer just yet. Okay, great. So it goes to the process of telling me, hey, take a look at the files, make sure you're familiar with what we are working with. It shows me how to create the school class. And then it shows me how to manage my students and staffs. And it even tells me how to create set classes. Okay. All right, so it seems like this is the end state of what we want. We have our data, our classes directory. I'm actually going to start off by making our classes directory already, where I'll have our student and staff in there for their individual instances. And let's go ahead and kick this off. Let me see, what is part 2? I want to make sure I don't go too far when I cut off right before part 2. Yeah, so it seems like part 2 is where we start building the actual menu and functionality. So here in this first part, we're just going to create the classes. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. All right, so my school class. From what I can see inside of the README, the only thing my school class is going to require is going to be a name. So let me go ahead and go straight into my school class, create my initializer. I'm going to call this function init, which will take in the first argument of self and the second attribute of name. So now to make this a class attribute, I'm going to utilize self.name and make it equal to name. And that will conclude my school class. From here, I'm going to go ahead and create a directory. I'm going to call this directory classes. And inside of classes, I'm going to make 2 separate files, one for staff and one for students. Go ahead and open up staff. And at the same time that I have staff opened up, I'm gonna open this on the side. And I didn't really ask, so I apologize, but can everybody see this okay? Do I need to zoom in a little bit? Is that better? All right, awesome. So now I have my staff here. I can see from the CSV file the attributes that this class is supposed to receive. So I'm just gonna go ahead and copy this first row so that I could just paste it into my initializer. I'm going to make my class of staff. It is not inheriting from anything as of now. And I'm going to go ahead and create my init class, which is going to take in self, name, age, role, employee ID, password, and finally go through the entire process of assigning all of those arguments as class attributes. think there's one more, which is password. All right, so there's my initializer. Everything has been typed out. I'm passing in the correct arguments, and it should be able to represent my class now. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for students. Let me open up these files here and take a look at the student class. Again, I'm going to copy that very first line, and then I'm going to create the class of student. And the class of student should again have an initializer method, which should take in self. We'll paste in the rest of our attributes there, or excuse me, in this case, they're arguments as of now. And now we'll create them into attributes. So there's our name. There's our role. So this is interesting because now we can see the attribute being different, right? In the other one, we had a staff ID or employee ID, and now we have school ID. So it looks like these two classes have a lot in common. So there's an opportunity to refactor my code and utilize inheritance. But we'll leave this open for now. And then self.password, which is equal to password. All right, so there's my student, my staff. Both of those classes have now been completed. Now inside of students, or excuse me, inside of school.py, I know that I am going to have self.staff, which should be equal to an empty list, and then self.students, which should be also equal to an empty list. All right, let's see if all of this works so far. I'm gonna go ahead and exit out of classes, and I'm going to execute my runner.py. So there we can see my print statement from school.name saying Ridgemont High. So my school class was able to work. I had a couple of examples in the README here so that I can see that my classes also work for the students. So here's an example for student. Let's make sure that worked. Arguments input in the correct order. All right. Where's student? There you are. All right, so let's make sure this worked. Let's go into classes and let's execute Python student. Oh, probably should print. All right, so we can see that Diana is also being created effectively. And I wonder if we have one for staff. Okay, we don't have one for staff, but we can always create one for staff utilizing the data that we already have here. All right, and this is Culpepper. So let's print Culpepper.name and see how that goes. All right, so our staff is able to work correctly. Our student was able to work correctly as well. And there's a little bit of a trick that is being demonstrated inside of this README. So this README says, hey, you could also utilize something like a star argument. And it's trying to show me how that works, right? It's how the spread operator would work for this specific information. So let's talk a little bit about that spread operator. And I'm going to go ahead and do that within the student folder. All right, so here in my student, we can see that we have a couple of attributes that, or excuse me, arguments that go into the initializer. So let's make this a Diana dictionary, all right? We know that we are going to need a name for Diana. This is going to be Diana. We know that we will also need an age, which in this case, we want it to be 17. We have a password, which we will have as password. We have a role. It says student. And finally, we have our school ID. Right, and the school ID here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, well, let's take a look at our instance down here so that we can see what issue we're running into. We are passing the correct amount of arguments to the initializer, which is the reason that if we execute Python student.py, we can see Diana showing up in the terminal. But what happens if I try to see the role for Diana? Right, maybe instead of name, I actually want to see the role. Well, when I execute this command, we can see that it's showing me password. Why is that happening? Can anybody answer that question?
Did you initiate it out of order? Like with your Diana dot or equals student?
Right, I'm passing my arguments in the incorrect order, right? I'm passing the correct amount of arguments, but the connection between argument to attribute is out of order, meaning that password is actually being passed as role. Well, how do we fix that? How do we make this more dynamic? Because I don't want my program to be so strict to where a little bit of data being misplaced in a different order would crash my program. Go ahead, Owen.
You can do for each of your arguments, do whatever that argument's actually called in your class equals, and then the actual argument you're passing to initialize that class for each one of those.
Awesome. So I could do something like this, right? Where I'm saying, hey, here is the age. Here is also the password. Taking a minute. I apologize, everyone. Roll, and then I think this one's school ID. There you go. All right. So here we have all my information. Well, now when I execute it, now the role actually populates a student. All right, so I did assign each one of these attributes, but that took a little bit more typing than I would prefer it to do, right? And it, like we said, we want our program to be a little bit dynamic. So having specific roles this way, or trying to structure a program that will accept things in a specific order, isn't necessarily going to work for us. So someone discovered, hey, this is a problem, we need to fix it, and we got to make it in a way where we can identify things through dictionaries, because we all know that dictionaries are representations of real life data, right? Or a real life object. Well, when we're talking about object-oriented programming, these are objects as well, right? When we talk about it under the hood, it's essentially a massive dictionary. Well, how could we do that? I have this Diana dictionary. If I just pass in star Diana dictionary, what it's going to do, it's going to deconstruct this dictionary and essentially recreate this equals assignment, right? So it's going to do that for us without me having to actually type it out. So let's have our student here, and let's do Diana dictionary. So I comment out this information, I execute, and we can see that it still shows me student, right? All right. That is all we're doing. We're just shorthanding this by utilizing a dictionary. And we'll see why this is going to come in handy once we start working with CSVs here in a little bit. At this point, I've been going on for quite a bit. Before I keep pushing into the assignment, does anyone have any questions over anything that I've done up to this point? Let's hear it, James.
Just double checking for that dictionary method. The keys probably have to match what's in the init method in the class. Exactly. That's how it's matching it, I assume.
That's correct. Yes, it is looking at the key, matching it to an argument, and then giving it to this expected attribute. All right. Any other questions? Let's hear it, Ryan.
I guess whenever we do our project, is there a specific way, kind of like you did with making your classes directory for where we would apply certain files, or as long as we can import it and export it like into where we need, is that like personal preference with how we access them?
The template's already going to be provided to you. You're going to have a directory and file structure already provided for you to be able to execute it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Of course. All right. Doesn't seem like there are any other questions. So let's go ahead and keep pushing forward here. The next step that we have in our project is going to be actually loading our data by creating a class method named loading data, which is going to open up our CSV file and create a bunch of class instances, just like we see here. All right, well, let's tackle that down from this student perspective, since we've been working with students so far. Let me actually just comment that out. All right, so here's the student class. And now I'm going to create a method called loading. Is it data? Is that what it was? Loading data. Where'd you go? Come back here. All right, there it is. So it's either all students or all staff, I'm assuming. Okay, let's do that. So let's do all students. This is only going to require self for now. All right. And what we want it to do is we want it to find the student's file. I wanted to read through each one of these student lines and create a dictionary for each one of them. Now, for each one of these dictionaries, I want to create a class instance, which gets appended to a list and gets returned from this method. All right. So let's do some pseudocode. So open the CSV file. From there, what I want you to do is I want to create dicts from CSV lines. All right. Then I want to iterate through list of dictionaries and create class. Oh, you know what? That should be a separate line. Create class instances per dictionary. And then finally, I want to append instance into a list. And then I want to return list of class instances. All right. Oh, naming this all wrong. Okay, so now this belongs to the class itself. It doesn't belong to an instance. So I guess the first question that I would ask myself is, should this be a class level method or should this be a instance level method, right? Do I want an instance of a student to be able to create other students? Well, I don't. So I'm going to go ahead and make this into a class method. And I'm going to switch out self with CLS. That's not necessarily a requirement. It's not going to crash your program if you put self in there. This is just Python standard. If this is a class method, you should utilize CLS as your first parameter instead of self. All right, so now open up the CSV file. So with open, I want to go back one directory, go into data, and take a look at students.csv as student file. And I could never memorize the remainder of this function off the top of my head. Let's go ahead and import CSV because I know that's what I'm going to need. And actually, I'm just going to look through CSV here. I'm pretty sure I could find dict reader. There we go. All right. And then I think is with CSV dot dict reader. What do you take in? Okay, I understand you're a class, but what are you looking for? Field names, dialect, args. Okay, I'm not passing any of that. F likely stands for file.
You would do, you need to set up a variable. So like CSV reader equals
you.
CSV dict reader,
Yeah.
and then your file.
That's in student file. All right, there you go. And let's just print reader for now, so that we can see what that does. All right, we'll pause there. Let's run the student dot all students and execute our script. All right, so there we get a CSV dict reader object. All right. Now, this is a fancy class, right? Because we saw dict reader is in fact a class. And it's just telling me, hey, there's a class instance that works through this. But the cool thing about a reader is, or a dict reader, is that you could actually iterate through it because it knows that it's a list. So if we say for row in reader, print row, and now we execute our Python script, we can see that we get a dictionary for each one of our CSV lines. All right, so there's my all students method. It is a class method. We were able to open it. We then created dictionaries from each CSV line, and we were able to iterate through this list of dictionaries. Now we want to create class instances and append them into some sort of list. And I'll do this the regular way that we've seen, and then after that I'll do list comprehension just so that we could all get a little bit familiar with list comprehension. But essentially what I want to do here is I want to say CLS, and then I'm going to pass in row. And I guess I could append them here as well. So I could just say students, make that equal to an empty list. And then I could say students dot append and pass in the row. All right, so once this is over and I am finally closing my loop here. Oh, wow. Then I want to return the students list. And let's actually print students as well, so we could see it. Okay, I'm going to execute my file, and there we can see we have our list of class instances of the student class. All right, before I refactor this to utilize list comprehension, I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor for questions. Does anyone have any questions over what I just did? All right, let's hear it, James.
Yes, just real quick, the class method. Can you elaborate on that real quick? Why did you use a class method up there for the all student?
Yeah, let me go ahead and bring that down here. So the way I like to think about it is kind of like a parent, right? So we have this user. Let me get rid of all this. So here we have our student class, right? Which is a blueprint, or essentially kind of like a factory, right? Its job is to create instances. And then inside of it, we have a student, like Doug or someone else inside of the student body, right? And these are all class instances. They belong to the student class. Well, now when I think about the functionality of my program, when it comes to creating more of these instances or more of these students, I have to decide, well, what should this method exist, right? So should Doug or a student be able to add another student into my program? No, right? I wouldn't want that to be, it's kind of like handling permissions. I wouldn't want them to be able to do that. I wouldn't want a student to have the access to create or register other students. Instead, I would want to limit that to only exist to a class. So the class itself can use it, and maybe somebody utilizing the program can call the class itself, but not each student instance have the capability to conduct that behavior. Does that make sense, James?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. Gary?
So I'm just having trouble reading to my students.csv. I can screen share if that helps, or I even take a screenshot and post it in the questions.
We'll go over pathing here shortly. More than likely what you're having is a path issue where it's telling you that the file doesn't exist where you're trying to locate it at. And I'll go over why that's happening here shortly.
Thank you.
Of course. Demi?
So in this instance, would it matter if you used a class method or a static?
So a static method can be utilized by both instance and class level, right?
Okay,
In this case, I don't want the instance to have access to it. So because
got you.
Okay.
Okay, that makes sense.
Awesome. All right. So there you go. We have our classes. It's been built out. Now let's take a look at this code, right? We're making it work and it works just fine. But maybe there's a better way to construct this operation here, this for loop. So instead of creating my for loop this way, utilizing the for in loop, what we can do is we can utilize something called list comprehension. We can make students where what we want is the class of X for X in reader, where X is just representing the dictionary itself. And I would have to indent my return statement there because I am now within the open loop, but that would kill my function. And it would still return the same exact outcome, right? If I go through and I execute it through my terminal, we can see I still get all of my class level instances. It's just a lot less code when you utilize list comprehension. I'm still doing the same thing. I'm still utilizing a for loop. I am still grabbing the dictionary and turning it into a class instance. It's just that now instead of appending it to a pre-existing variable that I had up here, I created the same variable on the same exact line. So that's list comprehension in a nutshell. All right. Any questions over this up to this point?
I got a quick one.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So the spread operator that you're using there, it prints it out within the row itself. So it actually prints out like first row, and then separates it to the next row, then the next row, then the next row.
Right. So this, when I'm going through each row, that's happening here, right? So X would be representing each individual row. The reader is what actually takes this CSV file and turns it into a list of dictionary rows.
Okay.
All right. Awesome. Let me go ahead and comment out this line of code there too. And I'm just going to move my return statement up so that we can have all of our code nice and consolidated here. All right. So there's our class method. We have created it and we have all students. Well, now we have to do the same thing for staff. Let's take a look at staff. Close students. And let's go ahead and code staff. All right, so I'm going to repeat the process, almost like copying and pasting, right? I'm going to make a class method. This is going to be a method called all staff. Again, it's going to take CLS instead of self because this is a class. Oh. And then from there, I'm going to, with open, specify the path into data. and then into staff.csv. As file. Then I'm going to say my reader is equal to, I need to input CSV reader again. All right, CSV dot dict reader. This is going to take in the file. And then finally I can say staff is equal to CLS X for X in reader. And I can then return my staff. Let's go ahead and see it happening. I'm going to print my class method here of all staff. And there we go. We can see all of my staff instances are being loaded into my program and being printed out. All right. Before I move on from this loading data when working with CSV files, does anyone have any remaining questions? Let's hear it, Owen.
How could you like test to see you're making sure all your parameters are getting in there instead of printing out like that hex statement? Like couldn't you do like a repr method? I'm just trying to make sure I'm thinking the right way.
Absolutely. Yeah, we could add a representation method here that says, let's do df repr. There you are. And then this is going to return an F string that says name. And let's just do name and age for now, just to keep things simple. I know that there's going to be one provided to us here shortly, so I just don't want to do too much retyping. But now when we execute the script, it shows us the name and age for each one of the instances. So that's a very key thing to talk about as far as differences between the representation method and the string method. The string method, if I were to utilize that and then run it, wow, my keyboard skills are getting rusty. So you'll see that if I utilize the string method, it still shows me the memory location for this instance, right? Well, that's not necessarily what I want. The representation method will also represent or demonstrate the string, even if it's nested within a parent data structure, right? So the parent data structure being the list, each one of these instances are nested. So by turning it into a representation method, I can still see the string for it being represented. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and one more. How can you scroll down to see how you like initiated the repr method, or where did you do that at?
So this is what initiates the repr method, just writing def repr as far as what calls it.
Print. Okay. Yeah, what calls it is what I was trying to. So, okay.
Awesome. So this is returning the staff. So when I do the print statement for that staff class, all staff, that's where it's printing the return value.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. All right, I see a couple of people that I think are attempting to type along. So I'm gonna go ahead and pause here for a second, just so that everybody can see this file. And I could also just, let me actually just send this file here on Slack. That way we all have it easily available to us. All right. Let's take a look at what else we have here. So we have loading our data, we have our classes. We were able to do that pretty well. Oh, there's a person.py. Where did that one come from? Let's see. Did I miss a step? Nope. All right, so there's a person.py that we haven't interacted with yet, but that's probably where we're gonna put a lot of the common ground into. But I do see print staff and print school students being a thing. So let's tackle that issue first before we go into refactoring our code. All right. So the next thing that we're going to go into is we're going to go into school, and we can see that school is now calling those methods. So I'm going to grab school. From school, I am going to say from classes dot staff, I want to import staff. And from classes dot students, I want to import student. So staff should be staff dot all staff, and student should be student dot all students. All right. So now we're about to run into an issue here, and I am glad that it's going to happen. So please do not freak out. This is going to be a pathing issue that I have to explain here. So let's take a look at staff. I'm going to change directories, go back one. If I run ls now, we can see that I am in the same directory as the runner. Well, now let's execute this. So Python runner.py. Well, I'm getting an issue. It's telling me, hey, you're calling this method, and this method is trying to tell me where to find this data. But when I go to take a look at this data, this doesn't exist. Well, that doesn't make any sense because I just executed it in the correct file and in the correct location, and it worked fine. Well, what's happening? Well, now let's talk about how Python scripts are being executed, especially when you conduct imports like this. So when I conduct imports or I go to execute runner, everything is being executed from runner.py. Right? So the moment I import school from school, the entire script of school.py is being adopted by the runner. Okay, well, that doesn't really change anything for me as of now. But now let's take a look at what else I'm adopting. Well, inside of school, I am also adopting the entire script of staff. And I'm also adding the entire script of students. Okay, well, what does that mean? Or why is that an issue? Well, let's take a look at this data, right? Or at this path here. And while we're taking a look at that, let's open up the path itself so that we can see what's happening. When I was executing my scripts before, I was executing them from within the directory named classes. So if I go into classes and I go back a directory, there is another directory named data. And inside of said directory, we can see that I'll find staff.csv. So that seems to be correct. What's the issue? Well, it's no longer being executed inside of this directory. The script is no longer running from here, right? It's no longer running from inside of the classes directory. It's instead of running from the runner. So because it's running from the runner, I'm telling it, well, go back a directory and find data. Well, if I go back a directory and I run ls, there's no such thing as data. All right. So I have to change my pathing now. My correct path now would be inside of this current directory in the same place where runner is located. There is a data directory with staff.csv inside of it. That's all we need to do. Just a quick change. I go back into review. I execute my runner, and we can see that the entire runner was able to run correctly this time. All right, let me go ahead and ensure things are commented out where they're supposed to be. So let's comment that out. Let's go into students. Everything is commented out. And all I want to see is the staff. Well, all we get is the staff. If I wanted to see the students, then I run it. I also see the students. All right, so that's the whole reason why we're getting pathing issues there. When you're executing from the runner level, all the code, regardless of where it's located, it's being ran and executed at the runner. So if everything was working inside of classes and then it stopped working at the runner level, it is because you're no longer nested within a directory of classes. You're now running at the runner level. So you just need to fix that path. Does anyone have any questions over pathing? Okay, great. So let me take a look at the README one more time, just so we can ensure that we actually accomplished our challenge here. We were able to create our school. We were able to create our student and staff classes. We then refactored our code to utilize the star quargs. Utilizing star quargs, we also implemented a load data method. We created our correct directory outline. We saw this efficiently working for both all students and all staff. And we also connected it to the school and executed it at the runner. All right, so it looks like we are complete with part 1 of this exercise. I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor for overall questions over anything that we covered for part 1. Let me check Slack here. Oh, awesome suggestion, Brandon. Run pwd on the terminal, and then that will give you a good working directory as well. Okay, awesome. Doesn't seem like there are any other questions. So before we go into part 2, let's go ahead and take a 6-minute break and come back at 2:20 to continue on with part 2. Thank you so much, everyone. All right. So welcome back, everyone. Now let's go ahead and start part 2 of this assignment here. Close all of this unnecessary nonsense. And let's talk about part 2. So in step 1, we're going to create the menu. So we're going to think about our program, and we're going to start grabbing this menu here. Now it's going to tell us to create the menu. It gives us a print statement that we can utilize for a menu. We also have to think about, hey, when this menu gets printed out, do we want this menu to consistently reproduce itself, or how are we going to handle the program continuously running inside of the terminal, since this is a terminal-based program, right? So there we see that we can also have the ability to list all of our students. So we don't have that method yet, so that's probably something that we're going to want to create. Viewing a single student, also something that we're going to want to create, and it looks like we're going to ask the user to provide an ID. And then we have a sample of what the string method should look like, and finally being able to quit. Great. Well, that is as far as I'm going to break this down. I am now going to pass off the baton to you all and have you all walk me through the process of being able to create this implementation, right? How do we do this part 2? What's next? All right, all the volunteers. I love it. Let's hear it.
So,
what's next?
So you need to go to your students class or student class. And it wanted a string method, right? Not a repr.
It looks like that's what it's asking for, yes.
Okay.
Do you want to go from top to bottom, or do we just want to kind of bounce in between these steps?
Probably list all the students first. That'd be where I would do it. I might be wrong, though. Yeah, list all students. So you definitely want a string method in your student class.
Okay. What would that string method look like? This is for everybody, so if somebody disagrees, you know, you guys need to say something as well.
And it's just asking for the student name, correct?
Let me take a look here. You guys have access to these readmes as well, just so everyone is tracking.
Yeah, I need to open it.
Right, awesome. Let me share it here on the chat, the link. All right, so it looks like this is what they want for the string. Okay, great. So a string method has been completed. What's next? And let me go ahead and pass it off from you, Owen, because otherwise you're going to lead us through the whole exercise. Let me pass it off to, let's hear from Demi this time. What's next, Demi?
You're muted.
Sounds like he's mute.
You're muted on Zoom.
Mute.
There you go. We can hear you laughing.
All right, cool. Okay. Can you scroll or well, yeah. Can you go back to the README?
Yes, sir. You want me to go to the very top?
No. And Owen did the part where define string self and then age. Was it self dot age and then self dot ID on students dot py?
Right, this is what we did.
Yeah. And then can you go back to students dot py? Return statement. Got you. So are you not putting that in the string method?
It is in the string method.
Oh, okay. It looks like it's tabbed over or something. Oh, gotcha. With the 3 dashes. Okay. I've never done that in my code before. All right. And then the next step,
Right. So
school. Got you. Okay. I was confused on that. So it's just school underscore ID.
right. Yeah, so it looks like the next step would be being able to quit.
One problem we can fix before.
Yeah, I think we should go back to the top and start from step 1.
All right, let's do that. All right, step 1, menu. How do we want to tackle the menu, everyone?
Do we need to make a method that does an input for the user to the terminal?
We will have to create one, yes. So you're saying we wanted it to be a method that takes input to the terminal. Let me go ahead. I'm gonna do that on the school, I think. So let's do that. And let's do run school. Why not? All right, and then we have our menu. Oh, that's not it. Which our menu should look like this. All right, so there's our menu. And then you said that we wanted to take in input, right? So
Right. Yep.
User input, or let's just call it user selection, be equal to input, and then menu. Okay, awesome. What's next?
So then from there, I think it would be, would you have if else statements depending on the number that's picked, and then it will execute the method to produce what you want from whatever was on the list.
Okay, awesome. So if user select is equal to 1, then what I'm going to, and I'm actually gonna, we'll go through it here shortly. Let's say print list all students. Elif user select is equal to 2. This one's add a student, right?
I think so. Add and subtract.
Yeah, remove a student. And then 5 is quit. And then for an edge case, we can just do like if else, like it's invalid.
Okay.
For any other anything else that's attempted to be passed through besides 1 through 5 for an else statement.
Okay,
Nice.
awesome. So there's the run the school selection. Great. Gary?
I was thinking we could put this into a while loop. We can leave the if statement and we can set a variable as a Boolean, and if they select one of these, then obviously it'll proceed with what it's supposed to do. But if it's else, then it'll rerun the code and set it to we'll flip the Boolean.
Got it. Okay, so let me try to do it this way here. There you go. Does that work? I know you wanted to do a Boolean switch, but I think the break will kill it as well.
Should be fine.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so we've created our menu. Let's actually test that out real quick just to make sure it actually runs. School. All right, so there we go. We're getting our menu showing up. Let's go ahead and type in the correct inputs. So there's list students. So we put list all staff, where it's actually view a student. Why do we even have staff? It's nowhere in the menu. Okay. All right, well, that works. 3, we have add a student. 4, we have remove a student. And if I type in a bunch of gibberish and I run that, it tells me, hey, that was improper input. So finally, 5, come back soon, and it kills my program. Okay, great. So we have our menu somewhat running now. It's working pretty well. What's next?
You need to call the methods actually within the options.
Okay, so let's call student dot list students. And I wondered if this is where, well, we can't list students from the student class. It would have to happen from the school, so it would have to be something like self dot list students. All right, so how do we create this list students method? Because as of right now, it doesn't exist. What would be next?
Making
Would you have to
that
create a method
Okay, so I
for
create,
listing students?
let's do that. So def list students, he's gonna take in self. All right, what's next? So you said it's gonna list the students. How do we want to do that?
by the dictionary that we have in the student file, or it's the student yeah, Python file.
So in self.students, we have a list of class instances.
Oh yeah.
right?
So
Doesn't self,
for
sorry, in school PY
go
self dot
ahead.
students is already in the init method. Can we just pull that to list the students?
Yeah, we can. So we can iterate through that list
Yeah.
of students. So let's say for stud in self.students. And then we could, we probably want to enumerate here. IDX stud. Then we could print IDX +1. Let's actually make this all into a quick. Oh, I did those backwards. I was close. Okay, so IDX +1, and then stud.name. Does that work for everybody, or is there some more detail that we would like to include here?
No, it looks good.
Okay, awesome. So that should list all of our students. Let's go ahead and try that out. Let's run Python runner py. So we can see that the runner is in fact executing our menu. Let's try option 1. And we get Lisa, Jesse, Slater, so on. It's just that option 1 that is being represented up top. All right, great. So that worked perfectly. Let's move into our next function here. The next one is, seems that it's seeing a student. How do we want to do that?
We can get it by ID number.
All right, so let's go ahead and grab student ID. So let's do stud ID is equal to input, please enter student ID. All right, so that's going to prompt the user for the student ID. Once we have that ID, what do we want to do? Let's hear from Tristan. How could I find a student with the proper ID inside of this list?
So it'd be the same as the last one, but like looping through all the students. However, instead of printing out each one, if it matches an ID, then it'll print out that one specifically.
So you want me to get a method? Create a method then.
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
get student by ID self, and then you said to iterate through each student. And I think you want to say something, Demi. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, you had already hit it on creating the method, but would you just call the method so print, do like a print statement of self dot name or student dot name?
I think
Because
we
like if you enter the ID, then it would return the name, or am I confused?
yeah, that's what we want. But I don't think we want the name in itself. I think we created a method for that. So if I go over to student, we have a string method.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right, so we have our student ID that's being passed into this method other than self. We look through each one of the studs and we say if stud.school ID is equal to stud ID, then we want to return said stud. Now, what happens if it doesn't match any of them? What do we want to return instead?
Just a print statement saying student not found or student ID not found.
Ah, got it. So what you're saying,
Or we could return whatever their input is, like input not found
nice. So this
or
method,
none. Got you.
yeah, this method's specific job is to return a student instance or none, right? Now, how we
Correct.
handle that, definitely I agree. We could say, hey, well, in this case, I can say current stud be equal to self dot get student by ID, pass in the student ID, and then say if current stud, and I want to print current stud. So if there is an instance that gets returned, then we print that. If there isn't, meaning that it's none, then I want to print there are no students matching these credentials. Why not? All right, so there we go. I'm grabbing the input. I am then looking for it by the ID. If it exists, then great. And if not, it'll say, hey, there's nothing here. So let's take a look at it. I'm gonna list all of my students. Great, that still worked. We have Lisa, Jesse, and so on. Gonna go ahead and try 2. Tells me to enter a student ID. I should have looked at them before I entered this part. Student ID. All right, let's just grab Lisa. 1, 3, 3, 4, 5. All right. So I'm just gonna put that here in my terminal. And then we get, hey, this is Lisa. She is 25 and there's her ID. And then after that, it knocks us back into our menu. Well, let's try that again. Let's try to put a bunch of gibberish in there and see what it says. Well, now we get, there are no students matching these credentials, and then knocks us back into the menu. Awesome. So just remember, we got to keep in mind that single responsibility principle, right? When you're creating a method's job is only one thing. So in this case, when we were talking about grading a student, its job isn't to handle whether the input was correct or not. Its job was to ensure that there was in fact a student, and if there isn't one, to return nothing. All right, so that's our single responsibility principle note there. All right. Awesome. So now we tackled 1, which is listing all of our students. We tackled 2, which is seeing one specific student. And now we have one last one, which we have to implement, which we already did, which was number 5, being able to break out of the program. Let's go ahead and take a look at our menu here, or our README, to ensure that we achieved all of those steps. So we in fact did have a menu that gets printed out. It does ask for user input. It does actually show all of our students. Not like this. Actually, it looks like we also have to provide the ID. So let's change that real quick. And we have stud dot school ID. All right. So that should fix that. Then we have being able to view one student, which we already had a string method implemented, so that also worked. And then we were able to quit. So that is it for part 2 of this assignment. All right. At this point, does anyone have any questions over how we completed part 2 of this assignment? All right. Doesn't seem like we have any questions. Let's go ahead and take an 8-minute break. Come back at 2:50, and then we'll tackle part 3. Thank you so much, everyone. And I'll see you here shortly. All right, so let's tackle part 3. In part 3, it looks like, oh, I have too many files open. All right, so in part 3, we look like we have being able to add a student, which is going to be our first step that we're going to tackle. We have being able to delete a student, and it looks like that's it. So we'll add another little hurdle here where we'll refactor our code and go over an opportunity for inheritance between these 2 classes here. Excuse me. All right, so school.py, I want to be able to create a student. well, how could I create a student? Let's see. I know I'm gonna have to ask the user for inputs, but I also have to make sure that each one of those inputs is valid. So maybe this, instead of existing inside of the student or the school class, I actually want to make it exist inside of the student class. All right, so I'm gonna create my method here for being able to create a student. This is purely a design decision. Like this, it's my opinion as to where it should live. It's not something that we all necessarily have to agree with. This is where the whole part of getting code review gets kind of tricky because it turns into a philosophical argument as to where specific functions should live. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and create this create student class. And this create, oh, not class, excuse me, method, which is also going to be a class method. And what this will do is it will actually create a dictionary for a student. So let's say new student, and we want this new student to have a name, which is going to be an input student name. That was a good one. All right. Then we have our age, which for this one, I'm going to make a helper function here, which is going to be capture age. It's not going to take in any parameters, but it's just simply going to ask for an input. And then I'm going to say, hey, if type age is equal to integer, and return age. Otherwise, I'm going to utilize recursion to print improper input. Please enter a numeric value. Can't spell numeric. And then I'm going to return capture age. All right. What are the remaining attributes? So we have our role, which we know our role is going to be student. I'm not sure why we have that here, but let's go ahead and add that in there. And then school ID. Ooh, how would we want to handle school ID? Because it would have to be unique, right? Well, now that makes me feel like this entire method shouldn't live here then. Yeah, because I need access to all the other students, so it should be living inside of school. I apologize, everyone. This is why OOP can get a little tricky sometimes. Let's go ahead and add that here. BTF, add a student. All right, let's make sure everything still falls into place. Okay, so we have capture age. Okay, great. So now school ID. Let's go ahead and create a method for validating school ID. So df capture ID. Again, we're going to ask for a new ID. Let's say input. Enter. You know what? What we can do is just make the ID ourselves. So ID lists equal to, and let's do integer of x. Oh, dot school ID for x in self dot students. There you go. So that'll give me all the students. I can then say new ID is equal to max of ID list I don't know why I put an extra S in there. +1. That way we'll always iterate through it and it'll create our ID for us. And then return a new ID. So we won't ever have a repetitive one and it will always be incrementing. So there you go. So capture ID. All right, what else do we need for a student? Let's see, and then we need a password, which that one could be whatever they would decide. We could make it into a whole function where we say, hey, we want you to repeat your password. But for simplicity's sake, I'm just gonna allow them to do it on the first try. So input, enter student password. All right. Okay. Everything seems to be working well, or ideally will be working well. This is going to create our new student dictionary. And now we could actually return a student instance, or you know what, we don't even need to return it. We could just do self.students dot append, and then do, yeah, let's do it. So new stub instance equal to student star new student. We then append the new student instance and print new student instance so that we know it was successfully created. And let's try that out because that was a lot of work in a very hopeful manner that it will actually work. So let's see if it does the trick for us. All right. Let's execute the code and see how it works. So first, we're going to try what we've already built to ensure that we didn't break anything. Going to copy and paste this 13345 here. So I'm going to 2 13345. Okay, that also worked. I get back Lisa. All right, now I want to add a student. Let's see, 3. So enter student name. Let's go with Francisco. Enter student age, 26. And I get improper input. Please input a numeric value. So there is a problem there. And I could almost already tell it's being captured as an integer. So instead, I mean, it's being captured as a string. So I can just say is numeric. And that will work better. So let's run it again. We go to add a student, Francisco, age 26. Okay, that evaluates it true. And then it asks me for my password and then it asks me for my ID, which works perfectly fine, no problem. Let's just do FR for my password. All right, and there it is. There's my new ID. Francisco has been entered into the database. If I go to list all students, we can see that Francisco is then demonstrated. And if I go to view a student and we put in Francisco's ID, it will give me all of Francisco's details. Let me try that again. There we go. Oh, nope, it's not working. Interesting. Please enter student ID. I did. Let me see. 80891. Okay. So I want to view a student. Oh.
Did you not append it into like the list of students? Is that why?
No, so I did. The problem here is that it is all being interpreted as an integer. So when I create my new student, I'm saving it. I'm saving the ID as an integer. But what I want to do is I want to save my ID as a string, not an integer, because all of my terminal input works as a string. There you go. So let's try that one more time. Let's do Francisco. Let's enter my age and password. All right, I'm going to list all of the students. There is Francisco. All right, and now I want to view a student. And there it is. Now it worked. All right, easy peasy. Okay. So we were able to create a student. We were able to create a new student ID, capture the age and ensure that it is in fact a numeric value, and build our entire student dictionary altogether while appending them to the list. So that was a lot of code that I just wrote. Let me go ahead and do a quick review over what the code is actually doing. So when this code gets executed, the first thing it does is it attempts to create this dictionary. It asks me for a name, which is just a simple input string. That works great. Then for age, it looks like I'm calling a function. So it looks for capture age, and it triggers the function. Inside of capture age, it asks me for an age. If I were to not provide a number, it would then utilize recursion to call upon itself and attempt to capture my age yet again. Only once I provide a numeric value is this function going to stop being repeated. So I would be stuck in an infinite loop until I actually provide a numeric value. The role of student, that's automatic because we know we're creating a student. The school ID will utilize capture ID, which iterates through the entire student body that we have already registered, turns all of the IDs into integers. We then grab the max value from said list and add 1 into it. And then we return that as a new ID as a string. Password is just a simple string value. Once all of this gets completed, a new student instance is created. It then gets appended into the list, and then we see a print statement just to confirm that that new student was in fact created. And if I scroll up, I'm sure we can find it. Here we go. So Francisco 26 FR, and we see the print statement for the new student being created. And that is our add a student method. Does anyone have any questions over the code that I just wrote?
What was the max function utilized for up there?
What would it be max utilized for?
Yes, on line 30 right there. What was the max used for?
So this returns a list of numbers because it goes through all of the IDs and turns them into numbers. So since this is a list of number, I want the highest one so that I could add one more into it to ensure that the new ID is increasing and never being repeated inside of my database.
Gotcha.
All right. Any other questions?
Could the ID thing, could that also work if you just had it set to assign a random number?
Well, you run the risk of having multiple students with the same ID if you do that.
Or like if you made it like an 8-digit number, that'd be the chance of having two students having the same number would be kind of low.
I agree. It would be low, but the chance would be there. Right. So if you were actually working with the school and you were providing this information for them and ensuring this, one, you would utilize a database that would take care of this for you. But if you were hard coding it like this in this way, you would want to ensure that that possibility doesn't exist, right? Because two students with the same ID number definitely raises an issue, especially if they're dependent on that ID number to have multiple connections to other objects. Does that answer your question, Sean?
Okay, thank you.
Of course. All right, any other questions? Okay, if there are no other questions, let's go ahead and move into our final step, which is just deleting a student. So for deleting a student, or removing a student, we actually already did the hard work. We just need to find that student and then delete it, right? So we could go through the process of rewriting this and saying get student by ID, we pass in the ID, and then once it equals, we delete it or we remove it from the list. And let me actually ensure which one of the Python methods removes by value and not by index. So remove by value. Python. All right, so it looks like remove method to no, pop deletes by index, not by value. You liar. Yeah, so it looks like remove is gonna be what we're looking for here in reference to the list. All right, so let's go ahead and come down to, and I wonder if it's gonna work because it's a memory location. It should work, but we shall see. Let's try it out. So we already have the method for being able to get a student. So when a user selects that they want to remove a student, all we need to do is say new student or selected student, and then pass in the self.get student by ID, which then needs an ID. So I'm just gonna take this stud ID. All right, and then I'm going to say if selected student, if it's not none, then I want self.students.remove selected students. Else, no student matching credentials. And let me actually give me a second, Demi. Let me make sure that this works. All right, I'm gonna list all students, and we're just gonna go ahead and remove Lisa here. All right, I'm gonna go into the for removing a student. Please enter student ID. Okay, seems like that worked. If I go to list all students now, Lisa is no longer there. All right, so it worked. Great, it was able to work by value rather than by index. All right, Demi, you had a question?
Well, I was just gonna say it in that elif statement for user select equals 4. Could you have just done a separate method to like remove underscore student or something, or no? Did it have to be ran in that method that you have already?
No, I could have definitely created another method, but
Okay.
the overall behavior of getting a student would have been the same. So even if I created another method, I likely would have called this method nested within it.
Got you. Okay.
Awesome. All right. And I think that's it, right? That is all of our student menu has been completed. We have all of our code. We have things where they're supposed to be. We have our classes. We're able to create students and manage that information. Now, let's go ahead and move into a little bit of inheritance here. Can I go ahead and move into classes? And from classes, I'm going to touch person.py. All right, so in person.py, all I want to do is I want to combine both staff and students. Everything that they have in common, I want it to fall under this person. So I'm gonna go ahead and open this up in a separate window here. At this point, I'm not gonna need Google anymore, so I'm gonna cancel that out so we have some more real estate. And I'm gonna create my class of person. All right, my class of person should have all of this information actually, with the exception of the ID. So I'm just gonna simply remove my school ID from my parameters. Okay, great. So there is the repeated code. Now what I can do is I can say from classes dot person import person, and I can then have person here. And then finally, I can also say, I believe it's super dot init, and this is where I would pass the remaining arguments. Age, role, and password. And then that way everything would still function correctly. Let me go ahead and make sure that that is the case for staff as well. And let's pass that in as well. Nope. All right, let's make sure this works correctly. The runner works. Let's take a look at all of our students. All of our students are still present. Let's grab a student. All right, that also worked. Let's go ahead and remove a student. That also worked, and we can still quit. Okay, good. So we were able to refactor that a little bit, cut down a little bit of code as far as what is going on in our initializer. We can probably also throw this class in here. Right, or this class method in here. Let's go ahead and import CSV. And let's pass in file. Turn this into an F string. And we don't even have to call these staff, or we could call this list of people. And we could return the list of. And by doing that, let's just call this load data. Now let's make sure this actually works, because there's a good chance that I just broke something. Let's go into school.py. And let's ensure we're utilizing the correct method. So in here, I'm going to call load data, and this is staff. And this will be load data with students. Oh, students. So there you go. I would have broke that. Let's make sure that that's what I have here. Yep, CSV. Okay, let's see if that works. All right, what would I like to do? I want to see all the students. All the students are there. And good, we just refactored our code now. So now our code is all working from one inherited class, and no longer do I need this class method to exist. So I could comment it all out. All right, and that is it, everybody. That is going to wrap up our review. We have demonstrated inheritance utilizing the person class, which takes in the majority of the attributes, and also one method, which is class level, which we had to change to be a little bit more dynamic so that it would work correctly. Both my staff and student class are inheriting from the person class. They are utilizing super.init. One of them has a string method, while the other has a representation method. So we saw the implementation of both and their differences. Inside of our person class, we also learned how to work with the spread operator and CSV files utilizing csv.dictreader. And inside of school.py, we went over creating multiple methods, all of which were utilized to create the functionality of our menu in the run the school, which allowed us to view a list of students, view a student, add a student. We also saw a small implementation of recursion in that add a student here. And then we were able to remove a student utilizing the .remove method for a list. All right. At this point, does anyone have any questions over anything that we covered today?
Could you show the runner file one more time, please?
Absolutely.
Cool, thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
In the school init method, you changed it to staff load data, and did you? Oh, you have to put the file as the argument. Okay.
Yes, we put the file as the argument because in person, it needs the file name so that it can actually find the correct file. Of
Got it. Thank you.
course. All right, it doesn't seem like there are any other questions, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.